My name is Charlotte, and to be honest, sometimes it seems to me that my life is falling apart from the eternal rush and endless noise that surrounds me wherever I am. I am 32. I trade my face and words, traveling around cities and states as a sales representative for a large company, and at some point these roads, hotels with the same carpeting and smiles of clients, began to seem to me more like a prison than a job, because it is impossible to hide from them. They do not let go, even in thoughts. And when I return home, all I expect is silence. Simple, honest silence. But in my apartment, there is never any. The walls, thin as paper, let through every punch of the neighbors on the table, every quarrelsome word, the squeal of children and the shrill howl of the TV. And sometimes it seems to me that I live not in my own home, but in a common barracks where other people's voices haunt me until sleep. And so for several years now, I open the door to this rented apartment and feel fatigue and irritation rising inside me, which do not go away even at night. And so I decided that enough is enough. I saved money, albeit slowly, albeit not as much as I would like, but still. And now a firm decision has matured within me. It is time to look for a house. Not a palace with columns and a swimming pool, not an expensive mansion, but just my own corner with a piece of land, so that in the morning I can hear the birds and not the neighbors' quarrels. And in the evening I can sit in the yard with a cup of tea and not hide under the pillow from the roar of the TV behind the wall. I took the phone, dialed the number of an old friend, Mike, who had long ago retrained as a realtor, and said, "Mike, find me a house. I need air and peace." He chuckled into the receiver and in his usual businesslike voice clarified, "Well, are you finally ready? What exactly are you looking for?" I replied that I wanted something in between, not too big, but not a tiny box either, just away from busy roads, with a spacious yard and, if I'm lucky, neighbors who aren't the kind who make life hell. He said, "I get it. Give me some time. I'll see what's available. I'll call you back as soon as I find it." While Mike was looking, I decided to go to my parents. And yes, I realize that I visit them less often than I should, but constant business trips are exhausting, and the road to their house on the other side of town always seemed longer to me than it actually was. Honestly, every time I drive up to their little house with peeling white paint on the porch, I feel guilty, as if I abandoned them, left them alone with old age and worries. When I pulled up at the gate, the first thing I saw was my sister Janet's familiar car, and something clicked inside me. Of course it's here. It's always here. Janet is 2 years older than me, married to Rob, and they have 2 kids, nimble Tommy and little Sarah, both of whom seem to have been born with batteries that never run out. Janet doesn't work, so she takes the kids to our parents' house almost every day, and frankly, it seems like Mom and Dad are as much parents to her kids as she is. I walked into the house and saw the familiar scene. Tommy was racing around in the living room, pretending to be a racing car with his plastic car. Sarah was sitting at the coffee table, scribbling colorful doodles in a coloring book. Janet was sprawled on the couch with a tired face. Rob was lazily scrolling through his phone, and Mom was clanking pots in the kitchen, finishing dinner. When we finally sat down at the table, the conversation, as always, revolved around Janet and her children. Mom was praising how smart Tommy was that he had already learned to put letters together to form words. Dad was playing with Sarah, tickling her, making her giggle so much that everything at the table came alive, and Janet was complaining about the prices as usual, that food was getting more expensive, that baby things were like gold, that everything around her was a money grab. I sat silently, picking at my mashed potatoes with my fork and catching pauses in which I could insert a word, but the conversation always eluded me. And then, when Tommy knocked over a glass of juice and everyone began to bustle about, wiping up sticky puddles from the table and the floor, I caught the moment and said, "I have news too. I'm going to buy a house." There was a strange, dense silence, as if someone had turned off the sound in the whole house. Even Mom froze, towel in hand. Only Tommy was still whining about the spilled juice, and the others were staring at me as if I had confessed something shameful. I was expecting smiles, words of encouragement, something like, "Well, finally, Charlotte. Congratulations, well done, we are proud of you." But none of that came. Everyone sat with distorted faces, and Janet was the worst of all. She looked at me in a way she had never looked before. Her eyes seemed to be burning with anger and something else that resembled jealousy, and from that look, everything inside me went cold. Then my mother put her fork down on the edge of her plate, and with that special expression on her face that I knew all too well from my childhood, said, "A home? Charlotte? You don't need a home. You're always on the move anyway. You only come home for the night and then you're off somewhere again. What's the point? Get a flat closer to the office and that's enough." I stood frozen, and it took me a moment to realize that she was serious, and her words sounded as if my dream were just a whim, a fancy, like a new handbag or dress bought on sale. But it got worse. Janet perked up and spoke in that sharp voice she always used when she felt she could turn the moment to her advantage. "I need a home much more than you do. I have children, Charlotte. Children should grow up in proper rooms, not jostled in a bedroom with toys piled up to the ceiling. There's only one of you. You disappear all the time anyway. Your apartment is enough for you." I recoiled from her words, as if she had thrown something heavy at me, and I couldn't believe my ears. "Are you even listening to what you're saying?" I blurted out, but Janet just smirked and continued to press. "I'm saying that your future home should be mine. I deserve it more. I have a family. And you're alone." I glanced around the table, hoping that someone, anyone, would stop her, say, "Janet, you're wrong. This is stupid." But Dad nodded, as if she had voiced a reasonable thought. Rob didn't even look up from his phone, just quietly agreed. Mom nodded too. And then Dad, in the same voice that always made my palms go cold as a child, said, "She's right, Charlotte. You don't have a family. You don't have children. You're always on business trips. You don't even have a man by your side. Janet and her children need a home more than you do." I listened and couldn't believe that my father was speaking, the same man who had once taught me to stand up for myself. The world seemed to have been twisted. Everything became unreal. "Are you serious?" I blurted out. "I'm buying this house with my own money, the money I earned. With my labor, my back, and my time. I'm not giving it to anyone, okay? This is my dream, and I'm not going to let you take it away from me." I felt my voice break, grow louder, and the words sound harsher than I expected. My father blushed, and slamming his palm on the table, shouted, "You're selfish, Charlotte. You live alone. You have no responsibilities except work. You can safely stay in your apartment. Janet needs the house." And at that moment, I realized that this was the end, that I would not receive any support here. "I think you're all crazy," I said, getting up from the table. "This is madness." I went into the guest room to get my bag and purse, and through the noise of the dishes and the crying of the children, I could hear them in the dining room already discussing me, probably listing all my sins, whispering about how cold and ungrateful I was. I grabbed my things and headed for the door when my mother's voice came from the kitchen. "Charlotte, where are you going?" "We're not finished yet." I didn't even turn around. I just said, "Yes, we are." I'm done with this conversation. And then Janet's hysterical scream tore through the air. "Don't you dare leave us! We're your family!" But I was already outside, feeling the evening air on my face and walking toward the car. Voices were coming from behind me. They were shouting, but I didn't care, because everything inside me was boiling. I slammed the door, started the engine, and drove away, barely keeping my hands from shaking. All the way back to my noisy, hated apartment, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached, shaking with rage and resentment. When I got home and dropped my bag by the door, my phone vibrated as if it wanted to explode. Dozens of missed calls from Mom, Dad, and Janet. I turned off the sound, did not answer anyone. I collapsed into bed, but there was no sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice, telling me over and over that I did not deserve a home because I did not have children. The next morning, the phone was buzzing again. I opened my messages, and the first thing I saw was a long letter from Mom. "Charlotte, you are selfish and cruel. Family should help family. Janet needs this home for the children." From Dad, there was a short, "Call us back. We need to talk." But the worst of all were the messages from Janet. There were a dozen of them, and each one was pulsing with anger, that I was heartless, that I didn't care about my nephews, that I should be ashamed of not wanting to help my family. I didn't even finish reading them all. I just hit delete and felt a steely resolve grow inside me. I had a job, I had plans, and I wasn't going to let them throw me off track. In a few days, I was leaving for another business trip, and my whole life at that moment was reduced to closing the damned reports that hung over me like the sword of Damocles, and prevented me from even breathing normally, because the management knew how to put pressure on you so that everything inside you was squeezed into a lump, and you were afraid not only of not being in time, but also of simply surviving in this frantic pace, where every little thing turned into a test of strength. 2 weeks passed, and there was still no news from the family, and I was no longer surprised by this indifference, because after that shameful dinner, when they put me out as if I were some kind of trash, I stopped expecting anything human from them, and the more time passed, the more clearly I understood that no blood ties are worth enduring constant humiliation. Good. I was starting to feel more or less okay, learning to smile at myself in the mirror when Mike called, and I heard such excitement in his voice, as if he was about to tell me about some miracle. "Charlotte, I found something perfect for you," he blurted out, barely having time to say, "Hello?" And there was so much energy in his words that I didn't even try to be sarcastic, but simply froze and listened. He talked about the house, about 3 bedrooms, a large yard, about a quiet street where you can breathe peacefully in the evenings and not hear the neighbors arguing or banging on the walls. He talked about how the owners were in a hurry to move to another state and were ready to sell quickly, leaving all the furniture. And the furniture, damn it, was high quality and not the falling apart junk that is usually sold along with the house. That Saturday, he came to pick me up and drive me there, and as soon as I saw the house with its white siding and red door, the oak trees in the yard spreading out like old sentinels keeping watch over its owner, I knew this was it. This was the place to take refuge from all the shit that had been dumped on me in recent years. It was even better inside, with a granite kitchen where I could picture myself chopping vegetables while smelling freshly brewed coffee, a living room with a couch you could sink into, bedroom so full of light that for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Mike pointed out the neighbors to me like they were a bonus. Mrs. Henderson on the left, a kind old lady who had lived there for 20 years, and a family with teenagers on the right who he said were respectful and not assholes. And it all came together in a way that scared me because it seemed so perfect. "How much do they want?" I asked, my lips already trembling with excitement. And when Mike named a price, I knew I could do it, that I could put down the money and still not be naked. "I want to make an offer," I blurted out as soon as he finished. And inside, I was singing with the feeling that for the first time I was taking my life by the throat and not letting go. That same day, the landlord accepted my offer, and 3 weeks later, I was signing the papers, holding the pen like it was a weapon. And when they handed me the keys, I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I was a landlord. I had my own house, my own walls, my own yard, and I no longer had to endure the dull stomping of the neighbors upstairs or their eternal squabbles behind the wall. I didn't tell any of my family. After that humiliation at dinner, I decided that they didn't deserve to know that I had succeeded. I wasn't going to invite them to the housewarming party, let them swallow their envy in ignorance, because if they thought I was unworthy, then they weren't supposed to rejoice in my happiness. The day of the move was fucking great. The movers dragged my few things because the furniture was already waiting for me inside, and I walked around the house all day, touching the cabinets, ironing the countertops, sitting in every chair as if checking that all this was really mine. In the backyard, I drank my morning coffee, listened to the bird orchestra, and was glad that I no longer had to shout over the cars. At night, it was so quiet that I fell asleep without earplugs, and this was such a luxury that I had never even dreamed of before. I barely had time to get used to it a little when it was time to go on a business trip again, and the house was waiting for me, like a faithful dog that will meet its owner as soon as she returns. When I walked through the door again 2 weeks later, I knew it was time to celebrate, so I planned a housewarming party, and it was the best idea ever. I invited the people who really loved me, co-workers, friends from college, aunts and cousins who had always been there. We grilled burgers, laughed, told stories, and everyone who walked into my house told me they were proud of me, and I felt wings spreading inside me because finally there were people around me who saw me not as a loser, but as a woman who could. And that night, I was truly happy, standing in my yard surrounded by laughter and lights, knowing that this house was now mine and its walls would hold only my truth. Around 8, right in the middle of the fun, when the laughter was drowning out the music, someone started banging on my door as if they had a legitimate key, and for a second I thought it was a neighbor complaining about the noise. But damn, we were in our own house and could do whatever we wanted, so I went to answer it, not expecting to see anything special. But when I opened the door, my knees nearly buckled. There stood my parents, Janet and Rob, dressed like they'd been let out of a theater troupe to play the role of model mom and dad, and they had these gummy smiles on their faces that made me cringe. "Surprise?" my mother sang, as if she were about to hand me a cake with candles, and all I could manage was, "What are you doing here? How did you even know where I live?" And she waved her hand in response, as if it was all nonsense, none of your business. "Oh, we have our own ways," she said, and before I had time to slam the door or even collect my thoughts, they were pushing their way in as if it was their territory, and I was standing there, gaping, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I knew at once that one of my cousins or aunts had let it slip, and a rage shot through me. I should have been more careful who I trusted with such things. "Look at what our Charlotte has achieved," she smiled. "We are so proud. She has worked so hard for this wonderful house." Meanwhile, my father was huddled close to my colleagues, shaking their hands and speaking with the air of someone signing a mortgage. Yes, we always knew our girl would do great things. We raised her right. I listened and felt a wave of vomit rising inside me. Just 2 weeks ago, they were screaming at me that I didn't deserve a home or respect. And now, in front of strangers, they were putting on a show about caring and proud parents. They even split up like in a movie about police partners and began to rummage through my house, examining everything with such attention that the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I followed my mother upstairs and found her in my bedroom. She was rummaging through the closet as if looking for dirty laundry, peering into the bathroom, opening doors, and I felt as if I had been stripped naked and put on display. And downstairs, my father was busy in the kitchen, opening cupboards, looking in the fridge, feeling around with the appliances, and I realized that they weren't just there to congratulate me. They were examining every corner, as if they were preparing to report to someone else. I clenched my teeth and tried not to make a scene in front of everyone because the guests were watching, and I didn't want this nasty family drama to ruin my holiday. They stayed for about an hour, pretending to be a loving, supportive family, and I stood there, frozen with rage, counting the minutes until they left. When they finally got ready, my mother cast me a disappointed look at the door and said with emphasis, "You should be ashamed, Charlotte. Not inviting your family to the housewarming, not even telling us about buying a house. It's just not right." And my father agreed. Yes, we had to find out from other people. That's not how you treat parents. I looked at them and felt only one thing, relief when the door finally slammed behind them. After they left, the evening immediately became lighter, as if a heavy spirit had left the room, and my friends laughed again, asking who these strange people were and why they seemed so fake. I just shrugged, not wanting to waste a word on explanations. When the party was over and the guests left, I was left alone in the house, and instead of tormenting myself with memories, I decided to do something that really made sense to me. I went out into my backyard and for the first time imagined that I could create a corner here that I had dreamed of all my life. I had never had the opportunity to have a garden. In apartments at most, a pot with an unhappy flower on the windowsill, and now I had a huge yard, the earth under my feet, and I could do with it whatever I wanted. I spent the weekends planting flowers, pulling weeds, digging in the dirt, and feeling how the air fills my lungs, how the sun warms the back of my head, and how with each shovel I become stronger. It was then that I met Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, who came out from behind the fence with a mug of tea and such a smile that I immediately understood that this was who I would have to share this space with. And for some reason, for the first time in a long time, I felt calm at the thought that there was someone real nearby. One Saturday morning, I was plowing my new flower kingdom early, picking at the earth with such tenacity as if I were cutting the ropes that bound me to those endless years of rent and noise. And just as I was resting with that stubborn rose bush that clung to my gloves, refusing to acknowledge the pruning knife, I heard a voice over the fence from the next yard. "You must prune it more." And there was so much simple life experience in the voice that I almost felt the bush agreeing. I looked up and saw Mrs. Henderson with her white hair, the wrinkles that looked like memory tracks on her face, and gloves that still held the earth, as if she had just pulled up a radish. From her stance and her look, you could tell she was nearly 70. But she looked cheerful and strong, not the kind of old woman you feel sorry for, but one who knows how to handle a spade and life. "I'm Charlotte," I said, walking up to the fence, though I still felt a little uneasy inside. I'd only moved here a few weeks ago, and the world around me felt both alien and inviting. "My name is Eleanor Henderson, but you can call me Mrs. Henderson." She smiled, and we began to talk so easily, as if decades of life could be summed up in a few lines about the weather and where to plant roses. I told her about my business trips, about how the road devoured my days, about how I dreamed of this yard for so long that now every morning seemed like a small gift, and she nodded, made comments about the soil and the stability of the seedlings, and finally, by exchanging numbers, promised to watch the house when I was gone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was someone nearby who I could trust, not only with my mailbox, but with a piece of my life. 2 months passed, and everything went like clockwork. I arrived, I left, and the house stood intact, like a fortress, and I loved it more and more, as if it gave me its warmth in exchange for my care. But again, the authorities squeezed the deadlines, and I was sent on the road again for 2 weeks. I warned Mrs. Henderson, gave her the keys, showed where the meters were, and what to keep on the shelf in the refrigerator, and she, with that same calm categoricalness, said, "Don't worry, Charlotte. I'll look after it." The first week went well, and I had almost forgotten about the anxiety, until on Wednesday evening of the second week at 11, the phone rang, and from the first ring I realized that there was a tension in Mrs. Henderson's voice that was unusual for her. "Charlotte, dear, I'm sorry to call so late, but there is someone in your house," she whispered, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "I see a light and hear music." I tried to reason, "Are you sure? Maybe one of the neighbors. The light bulb is blinding me?" "I'm sure. There are definitely people inside. I hear voices and music." Her voice became hoarse with excitement. I tried to be rational, to push back panic with logic. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson had confused the house. Perhaps she imagined it. I knew her as a caring neighbor, and not a prophetess of trouble speaking in the dark. "I appreciate your call, but maybe you're wrong," I said, trying to sound calm. The silence on the other end of the line seemed to be drawing the voice of the phone provider closer, and suddenly Mrs. Henderson, as if burned by my mistrust, said coldly, "Well, if you don't believe me, I won't tell you anything more," and hung up. I was left sitting in the hotel corridor with the phone in my hand and a feeling of an icy wave running down my back that I couldn't shake off. I ended my business trip like a person drawn home by a magnet, and when I landed and got to my address, my heart was beating so hard that my ears were ringing. The house looked peaceful. The lights in the windows were as dim as ever. There were no obvious signs of forced entry inside. No broken locks, no overturned furniture. Everything was locked, clean. The refrigerator was in place. And for a moment I felt ashamed of my distrust of Mrs. Henderson, because she was an old lady. Maybe she had seen a shadow and had an anxiety attack. The next morning I bought a pie, not because I wanted to buy forgiveness, but because I really wanted to say, "Sorry, forgive my doubt," and went to her with this sweet gesture. But as soon as I crossed the threshold of her kitchen, she brightened and said, "I want to show you something," going to the table where her phone was. I saw the recording of that night. The image is dark, grainy, and like an old bad crime series. Shadows move in the windows of my house, and the lights flicker. I saw silhouettes, not faces, but I knew for sure that these forms were inside my house. My stomach dropped and I heard myself saying, "Oh my God, Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry I doubted it. Can you tell who it is?" She shook her head, her face serious. "No, honey, you can't see the face, but it's real," and sent me the video on my phone. So that day I returned home in complete horror, trying to understand how someone could have gotten into my house without breaking or forcing anything, as if the keys were entrusted to me by a secret and invisible hand. I didn't hesitate and called the security company. "We can have cameras installed by tomorrow morning," the technician said, his voice a saving note. "We'll put cameras at all the entrances around the perimeter, one in the backyard and one in the living room so you can see everything through an app on your phone." I listened as he explained that the cameras would be small, unnoticeable, and could be set to trigger motion-activated alerts and recording. And the feeling of finally being able to take back control of my life filled me with such relief that for a moment I almost cried into the phone, because for the first time since I'd left that dinner, my home felt like something other than a place to hide, like an outpost I could now protect. The next day, a technician from the security company arrived early in the morning, and by lunchtime, everything was ready. Small cameras so cleverly hidden in corners and doorways that they were impossible to spot unless you knew exactly where to look, and an app on my phone that showed me a picture so clear I could see the glint on the polished surface of my desk or a speck of dust caught in a ray of sunlight. I checked everything again myself, the living room, the kitchen, the entrances, the backyard, and felt relieved, realizing for the first time in a long time that my house was now under my control, even if I was far away. A month passed and everything was quiet, and every morning, waking up, I opened the app and saw only a calm picture: an empty house, neatly made beds, silence in the living room where only occasional glares of sunlight played, and darkness in the hallway. Gradually, I began to calm down, thinking that perhaps whoever had once broken into my house realized that he had nothing to do here and disappeared forever. But as soon as this feeling of imaginary security settled in me, I was sent on another business trip, this time longer than before, and I left without fear because I knew that now I had eyes and ears in every corner of my house. I even smiled when I told Mrs. Henderson about this, and she nodded and promised to keep an eye on things. On the third day of the trip, my phone rang in the middle of the night, and when I saw Mrs. Henderson's name on the screen, I immediately felt my chest tighten, although I tried to convince myself that maybe something had just happened to her, or that she remembered to water my plants. But her voice was too anxious, trembling when she said, "Charlotte, dear, you have people in the house again." I hear music and voices. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly speak, but I answered, "I'll check everything now, hold on." I opened the app, my fingers shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone, and a picture of the living room appeared before my eyes, live. When I saw it, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Because these were not thieves, not some random people, but my own family. Janet and Rob were sitting there as if this was their living room, as if these were their chairs, their walls, their light. And there were 6 other people with them, all dressed up, all holding glasses of wine, laughing and clinking glasses as if they were celebrating something important. I saw my sister walking around the rooms, pointing things out like a tour guide, and my father, Rob, standing behind my bar, pouring drinks as if it were his. My mother, Janet, standing in my kitchen, moving with such confidence as if she had always lived there, probably using my dishes, my food, my space that I had spent so long building. The anger rose up in me instantly, so strong that I almost called them directly to scream, "Get out of my house!" But I held back because my rage did not demand a scream, but something more, something they would remember for a long time. I dialed 911, and the dispatcher's voice was calm and steady as I said, "There are strangers in my home right now. I'm on a mission, but I can see it through the cameras. There are about 8 of them, drinking, partying, and illegally in my home." The dispatcher asked, "Can you see them right now?" And I swallowed back tears and anger as I said, "Yes, I can see them. They're in my living room." "Officers are on their way. Stay tuned," she said. "Let me know what's going on." I kept the phone to my ear, but I also kept my eyes on the screen, where the drinking continued, and my family laughed, unaware that their minutes of fun were numbered. About 10 minutes later, I saw police cars pull up to my house, lights flashing red and blue, tearing my frontage out of the darkness, and 2 officers getting out of the car, heading straight for the front door. I saw them knock. I saw the whole group inside go silent, the music stop, the glasses go down, and in that silence, Rob, my father, walked up and opened the door. I looked at his face, and it seemed to me that even from a distance I could feel his lips trembling and his hands making these quick, nervous gestures as if he were trying to explain something, to justify himself, to wriggle out of something. The officers walked inside, and I felt a chill go down my spine because the room that had recently been a madhouse was suddenly filled with their heavy presence, and every step they took sounded so loud as if they were pressing their heels against my heart. I watched them move around the living room, one of them taking out a notepad and quickly writing something down, and the other, without blinking, asking questions to those who were still there. And I saw that my parents and Janet were sitting with faces as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over them, confused, angry, and at the same time as if they did not understand how the hell reality had fallen on them. Their friends looked pathetic. Some were looking away, some were twitching their hands as if they wanted to disappear, and some were already on the verge of hysteria. I saw this and understood that finally all the masks were torn off, and there would be no more playing at being a happy family. And then something happened that turned the whole evening into a real nightmare. Rob, who, as I had already noticed, was barely able to stand on his feet from alcohol, suddenly flared up, as if someone had set him on fire from the inside, and went for one of the police officers. His face was twisted. He was screaming so loudly that the veins in his neck stood out, and he was pointing his finger right at the officer's chest, demanding that he, damn it, not dare to give him orders because he was, you see, family and had a right to be here. The officer took a step back, said something in a calm voice, but that idiot Rob only got more heated, and then I heard the dispatcher's voice in the earpiece, dry and abrupt. "Madam, one of them is behaving aggressively towards our officers. We are calling for backup." And Rob, meanwhile, had already reached out with his hands to the policeman, tried to push him, and then it was all over. The policeman grabbed him sharply, confidently, and a second later the iron handcuffs snapped on his wrists, and he was screaming, twitching, spitting words that I couldn't even make out because of the cameras and the interference. And when more police cars pulled up a few minutes later, the street in front of my house was lit up with flashing lights like a fucking carnival. Only it wasn't fun. I watched as the guests were led out one by one, as Janet covered her face with her hands and sobbed, as my parents sat there looking like they'd been slapped, and as Rob was led away kicking and screaming, handcuffs clanking into the night. They were all loaded into cars and driven away, and the house was empty, so quiet my ears were ringing. Half an hour passed, and then the phone rang. It was a police number. "Miss Charlotte, this is Officer Martinez," he said confidently. "We have several people detained who were found in your house this evening. They claim that they had your permission to be there and that you gave them the keys. Is that true?" I almost laughed into the phone, but I held back and just said coldly, "Absolutely not. I have never allowed anyone into my home or given anyone keys. They broke in illegally." He paused, then added, "These individuals claim to be your family and that there has been a misunderstanding." I exhaled and said slowly, with emphasis, "They may be my family, but that does not give them the right to break into my home. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The officer said they would be detained overnight and that I could come back tomorrow to file a formal complaint. As soon as I hung up, the phone immediately came to life again, ringing as if the devil had possessed it. First Mom, then Dad, then Janet. I didn't pick up a single call, and then the messages poured in, one after another, flashing across the screen as I sat and watched this circus. "Charlotte, we are at the police station. You have to tell them this is a misunderstanding." "Call us back right now," the mother wrote. "This is ridiculous." "Tell the police you gave us permission to use the house," the father added. And Janet, that nasty crybaby, sent a dozen messages in a row. "I can't believe you called the police on your family. My kids are with Rob's parents and I can't get in touch with them. You're ruining our lives." I looked at those words and laughed, really, bitterly and angrily, because they honestly thought I would lie to the police for them, that I would save them after everything they did to me. No way. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency and needed to get home early. He understood and said my assistant would take care of the rest of the trip. I flew home the next day, and the first thing I did was drive to the house that had been in chaos the day before. When I opened the door, I was hit by the smell of booze and food, and I saw that there were glasses strewn everywhere, greasy crumbs on the furniture, and empty bottles in the kitchen, and I knew they hadn't even had time to clean up because the police had taken them right out of that pigsty. I exhaled, closed my eyes, and drove to the station. And there they were, my entire family, whom I had seen in handcuffs the day before. They had spent the night in a cell, and they looked like they had been through a meat grinder. But that didn't make me feel any better. When I walked into the station, the atmosphere hit me like a cold shower. Everyone was talking at once, my parents' voices merging into a chaotic chorus of panic and mock horror. "Charlotte, thank God you're here," my mother said, trying to put a false joy into her words that sounded pathetic and annoying against my background. "Tell them it's all a mistake," she added, as if that could turn the whole nightmare they'd created in my house upside down. My dad, with his usual imperious air, commanded, "You need to explain to these officers that we had permission." Janet sat on the bench, sobbing and wailing about her children, who she said had been left without a mother, and Rob just stood there, his bloodshot eyes making me want to shoot and turn away at the same time. I took a deep breath, feeling the air vibrate with my anger, and turned to the investigator, my voice as hard as steel. "I want to make it clear that I did not give any of these people permission to be in my house. I never gave them keys. They somehow illegally entered my house and threw parties while I was gone." I saw my parents' faces turn pale, Janet start crying even harder, and Rob seemed to want to tear me to pieces with his eyes. Dad tried to press again. "Charlotte, stop this nonsense. Tell them the truth, that you gave us the keys and then got mad over something stupid." I didn't blink, gritting my teeth. "I'm telling the truth." "They broke into my house." The investigator nodded, as if confirming that I was now on the side of the law. "We need you to sign the papers, and we'll proceed with the charges," she said dryly, and I did, feeling a weight on my heart, but also a relief that there was now a formal legal point of reference behind this chaos. I decided not to push for the maximum sentence. The nephews were the least at fault, and I felt sorry for them. So I asked the officer if my family could be released on bail. They were, but the consequences of their actions remained, and each of them felt them. Fines, broken relationships, loss of trust. A few days later, the police called to tell me that it was even worse than I could have imagined. Janet had taken impressions of the keys at my housewarming party, using soft plastic and ordering duplicates, and had inside information about my business trips from a friend in HR. My sister had planned this all along, and the betrayal burned inside me. In the end, the family didn't go to jail, but they did fine me a pretty penny. Rob lost his job for reporting a crime at work. Janet lost her friends who were furious about her actions, and my parents lost the ability to reach me for weeks on end. But I ignored their calls and emails, deleting them as soon as I glanced at them. I changed all the locks, beefed up the alarm to a level that would be impossible to break into, even with the intelligence of a master burglar, and took a deep breath when Mrs. Henderson became an even more integral part of my life, becoming the person I could rely on. She was terribly upset that she hadn't recognized the threat in time, and she told me, "Don't blame yourself. I never imagined your own family would do something like this." I smiled bitterly at her, knowing that now that it was over, I no longer spoke to my parents or Janet. What they had done, the break-ins, the parties, the secret copies of the keys, was unforgivable. But my home stayed with me. It became my true sanctuary, protected and safe, and now it is looked after by Mrs. Henderson, a person who really cares about me. For the first time, I felt that I could breathe deeply, that I could enjoy every corner of my home without fear and betrayal, because this house became more than just walls and furniture. It became my fortress, my victory, my truth, and all of this is truly looked after by those who deserve my trust.